Hey everybody, Joseph Rothschild here, aka MBT, back again with another episode of Locals Live, and I appreciate you all coming with me for the Sisyphusian task that is making Ritual playable. I don't think we've won a game yet on this channel, but thankfully my opponent is playing Shaddoll, Timelord, and as a result this might be our first. They're splashing a significant amount of train synergy, so we're going to have to put up a defensive wall whenever possible. You can see a Red Eyes Transmigration in my opening hand. That's a new add to the deck in an attempt to give the deck something to do going first against archetypes that don't care about Unicore. So we're going to lead with a copy of Brionac. That's going to get a copy of Colossalus. We'll use Colossalus's effect in order to get ourselves a copy of Kaleidoscope, and you've probably seen this play a couple of times. It's where I reveal the Kaleidoscope and then realize, wait, that actually doesn't do what I want. I'm going to have to get something else. We're going to thumb through real quick and finally settle on Cycle. Cycle, of course, can bring back from the graveyard to the field, provided you have the requisite material in hand. And we're going to go ahead and use Kandal's effect, revealing the Cycle to special summon itself, and truthfully, likely a Talismandra. So we might be able to get something done this turn. I don't know how powerful it's going to be against Timelord Shaddoll. Of course, something in the dark like Lord of the Red is so powerful against so many strategies, not very good against a bunch of cards that say this card can't be destroyed. And cards that prevent your opponent from special summoning, while routinely very powerful, are much less so when your opponent doesn't intend to special summon. So we're going to make Brionac here and then trigger the effect of Ben 10. We're going to thumb through our deck real quick looking for our Ben 10 target of choice. This is how we pick up a majority of our games, is in game 1, blind going into, what is this? Vanity's Ruler, Majesty's Ruler. I can never keep this guy straight. He's the one with green hair, that's all you need to know. We're going to tribute our 2 incantations to normal summon this monster because we haven't used our normal summon this turn, and we'll pass it back to our opponent and say go. Now, they've opened some very spicy stuff. Just like my deck doesn't really interact with my opponents all that much, I stop special summons and effects that activate from the extra deck, their deck doesn't interact with mine. They're not able to flex things like Shaddoll Fusion that are killer in other matchups. So this is really a battle of which deck can be on its knees the least. Phrasing. My opponent's going to read Brionac real quick. Yes, it does have an on-field effect, which is relevant quite often. It allows you to spin your opponent's extra deck monsters back into their respective extra deck. Unfortunately, it's not very good against Time Lord dolls, but theoretically it could come in handy. You can see their hand has multiple Time Lords, and Time Lords are just so frustrating. If you've never played against the Time Lords, there's 2 things that make them so particularly annoying. The first is that they don't require a special summon. You can see my opponent just lays down a Sandion, and there's really nothing I can do about it. I take a look at it. No, it is not special summoned, and as a result, I'm not able to lock it. No, it is not from the extra deck. This is one of the very few powerful main deck monsters still legal in the game, and unfortunately, it has 4,000 attack points. Now, it does have a stipulation that no one's going to take any battle damage from any battles involving this card, but unfortunately, it also has a stipulation that you'll take 2,000 effect damage after it has attacked. So my opponent is going to go to battle phase, and then at the end of the battle phase, trigger the effect of Sandelion, dealing 2,000 points of damage to me. This is a fantastic way to win in time. Unfortunately, the second annoying thing about Time Lords is that they aren't easy to remove. They resist destruction by battle or card effect, and as a result can really only go to the graveyard through particularly illicit means. They shuffle themselves back into your deck during your standby phase, so often they're a plus attached to a Wabaku, which is really all a deck that's looking to grind your opponent out with something like a Gustav Max can ask for. We'll draw for turn, and ooh, it looks like a Valk. That would have been nice last turn when we could have used it to prevent our opponent from attacking, but we'll just take the damage and deal with it. So our hand is looking not particularly repeatable. You can see that we have a Brionac in there, that's good, but there's a Colossalus in the graveyard, which means we won't be able to fetch the mirror that we usually can. We're going to have to pass. One thing that irks me about Ritual is that you're not really able to flex your incantations repeatedly unless you devote your first turn to getting a Chalice Line. That has its own set of problems. If you're going for a Chalice Line play, you are likely not using Ben 10 that turn, which means you're not able to flex the unfair portions of the deck, and you get run over by people doing more broken things. I mean, getting a Chalice Line to hand is critical for recursive plays, but it's also really, really bad against Orchist. Our opponent will normal summon a second Sandelion, and okay, that's fine. At the very least, if they get this Brionac off our side of the field, we'll be able to use the Grave effect of Nekrav's Cycle. That's going to substitute for a copy of Colossalus and allow us to get Trishula next turn. Our opponent's going to activate Shaddoll Fusion. I have an Ash in hand, but I think, what, are you going to hard make it? This is polymerization as it was intended, sending 2 cards from their hand to the graveyard, one of which is a Shaddoll Dragon, in order to summon Shekinnaga. Shekinaga is an incredibly powerful card. It's able to negate the effects of special summoned monsters, provided you have a Shaddoll card in your hand to send to the graveyard. Now, it sends it not as a cost, but as an effect, so it'll trigger any Shaddolls that it sends. Unfortunately for my opponent, they don't have any. They really just want it to do damage. This is a very fantastic stat line for the deck because it enables really powerful Gustav Max plays. My opponent is thinking very quickly about going into Liba, I believe, pre-combat. That is the end of the game, but if I have something like a Valkyris, Liba is a very easy monster to remove. Inversely, if they're able to attack with Sandelian, which they do, followed by an overlay for Gustav Max, it's an entirely different ballgame. They get to do all but 2,000 of my life points, and anything that deals damage will likely be enough to follow up. That means that I, unfortunately, will have to contend not only with the attack points of my opponent's monster, but also with a beefy guy who threatens lethal if I don't have removal then. They elect to go to the battle phase with this board, and I really don't think this is worth Valking. You know, theoretically, we could prevent this copy of Shekinaga from attacking, but if we do that, we're then out of Valk for future turns in case our opponent has something like the third Sandelian, and I don't want to end up in that world. Because of this, we'll just take 300 damage from the Shekinaga attack, followed by 2,000 damage from the Sandelian attack. Our life points are looking pretty low at this point. Things aren't looking good, and we don't have a real path to victory for this game 1. In main phase 2, my opponent's going to pick up the extra deck and decide, yeah, it is probably time to try and burn my opponent out. At the very least, I can make them commit their hand to removal. They're thumbing over Gustav Max, and we don't have the Lost Art promo yet. When are we getting the one with a real gun on it, dang it? Alright, here comes the overlay, and that is a rank 10 train. He's going to detach from Gustav Max in order to deal 2,000 life points in damage to me directly. Some of you who have watched the Pro Play Games event may have noticed that the video that went up today included a very similar line of play in which a player steals 2 games in a row against a much better deck than his. Alright, we will draw for turn, and it's got to be something fantastic. Another incantation probably fits the bill. You can see we have an Ash Blossom just absolutely rotting in our hand. I'm used to Shaddoll searching. What's going on here? My opponent's going to look at the graveyard real quick, and I don't think I have anything with the graveyard effect outside of the Nekroz spells, so they're going to hand it back to me, at which point I will go ahead and activate Cycle. So Cycle will be banished alongside a Brionac, because we have another Brionac in hand, and if we need a 9-star banish worth of material, we can always just send it. That's going to add a Nekroz spell from our deck to our hand, and there's only 2 of them remaining that I could pick. I settle on Mirror, which of course is the spell of choice for Trishula, and there is not only a card in my opponent's hand, but also a card on their side of the field and a card in the graveyard, which is not always the case. We'll go ahead and activate Brionac's effect. That's going to fetch us a Trishula from deck. Wow, what a pretty card. It looks good in Ultra, despite only costing about $2. Afterwards, we're going to take a quick look at what we still have available. We could keep popping off, and I think it's in our best interest to probably do so. I'll ask my opponent about their hand real quickly. Those 2 cards are not set, they are in the grip, and as a result, I will be able to resolve the effect of Trishula if I so desire. I figure we might as well activate the effect of Incantation Bookstone afterwards if my opponent has some sort of response, so we'll go for the mirror now and go into a Trishula. Trishula's effect will trigger, that'll banish this copy of Gustav Max, and importantly, because the Shaddoll is going to the graveyard, I probably want to banish the Shaddoll fusion as well. I'll go ahead and take that sucker, along with one of the 2 cards remaining in my opponent's hand. Basically, either of them could spell Demise if they are the correct Timelord or a Time Maiden. Let's roll some dice, and a 5 means it's the one on the right side, and what do you know, it's the 3rd Sandelian. Oh my goodness. Sometimes you open all 3. That at the very least explains the Gustav Max play. We'll now activate the effect of Bookstone in hand, revealing Red Eye's Transmigration. I expect that probably ending on Red Eyes is better than not doing so. Theoretically, there's cards in my opponent's deck that will not resist destruction, and as a result, this card will be particularly good against. We're going to use Talismandra's effect in order to add Lord of the Red from our deck to our hand. It's unfortunate that this isn't exactly a Red Eyes card, though it does have the stat line, which means it's going to resist any normal summoned monster outside of a Sandelian. We'll shuffle up our graveyard and pass it back to our opponent after a quick attack step. They'll draw for turn, Take a quick look at the two cards in hand. You can see a Shaddoll fusion and what appears to be one remaining Timelord that's not particularly powerful. It's going to have to be something really, really good to get out of this jam. My opponent's going to look at the graveyard, thumb through it real quick, look back at the hand. Maybe there's some sort of archaic line that can get them out of this situation. They'll read Lord of the Red. Yes, it really is that good. It's 2 Dridents. It's unfortunate that this is the only deck that can really use it in any sort of competitive capacity. And I'm using the term competitive there a little liberally. They'll pass it back to me, read Trishula. Unfortunately for me, Trishula is a vanilla on board, but its on-summon effect is so powerful and its hand effect is so strong as well that I'm not too beat up about it. 2700 is a heck of an attack stat. They'll take one last look at the hand. Maybe there's something they can do here. And they'll decide to scoop it up. So it's time for game 2. Our opponent has elected to go first, and I don't know how I feel about that. Certainly, I'm happy that I'm able to flex the going second to power of rituals, but I don't think they really care about the explosivity of my boards if they end on something like a Timelord, which of course my opponent has. Ritual ultimately excels when it's able to go first and lock your opponent from special summoning, but that doesn't really matter either in this matchup. It might be a case of my opponent being on a rogue deck so rogue that I just don't have any understanding of how to interact with it with the cards in my deck. Thankfully, Ritual is nothing if not adaptable. We're going to lead with a copy of Pre-Preparation of Rites, and I believe I still have the Transmigration stuff in there. You can see that I've got a Hymn of Light in my opener, and it always sucks to not be able to search the best possible thing off of Pre-Preparation of Rites, but I'll take what I can get. We're going to get Red Eye's Transmigration and Lord of the Red. Thumbing through this deck, you can see a couple of new techs I've added, including a Saravius the Ancient and Ascended, usually used as a hand trap in extremely unfair decks. It's much more powerful when it's searchable. I have the Shinobird ritual as well. Why do I draw all the pre-prep pieces when I have it in the opener? I'm going to thumb this card real quick. I guess I will use Chalice Slime's effect. Now, it doesn't really matter that we're sending Hymn of Light to the graveyard because there's other ways to get Saphira onto the field if that was something I desired. More importantly, having it in the graveyard protects my rituals from particular pieces of interaction. Of course, they're not able to be destroyed by battle or card effect once while this card is in the graveyard, and if you use it early enough, it is very likely your opponent will just forget. I'll thumb through the deck real quick. I don't know what I'm going to get off Talismandra. I just really don't have a ton of really good options. I'm going to look real quickly. I could get a Shinobird, I suppose. I don't know how strong that is, truthfully. You know, we can get in for a fair amount of damage, but my opponent could easily kill me on the crackback. Getting Brionac is never that bad in a vacuum. You can go into a cycle play. You can go into a potential play that involves Trishula, but I eventually end on a copy of Ben 10 as my opponent doesn't have the requisite material in graveyard for me to banish with Trish. So Ben 10's a very powerful card that's going to allow me to search a light fairy for my deck to my hand. We'll go into Lord of the Red, and then I'll take a quick look at the Time Lord. Like all of them, it resists destruction, so unfortunately we won't be able to do that. We'll trigger the effect of Ben 10, and I should have something relevant in here. At the very least, we're deck thinning. We're not going to be able to tribute summon something like a Vanity's Ruler, Fiend, green-haired girl, but we will be able to add it to the hand, and it sure looks pretty up there. Now, one thing that this hand has that's different than most ritual hands is interaction. You can see we've set 2 spells, something we don't do often. I've cut the extra Foolish Burial Goods, so there's really no reason that we would ever be locked from setting, but setting 2 cards telegraphs basically exactly double Called by the Grave. Now, that's not to say that my opponent is going to have an easy time playing through it. Their entire deck relies on graveyard synergy, so hopefully I'll be able to get them. They're going to look at the 5 cards in their hand, and wow, that is a lot of Time Lords. If nothing else, they can pass a couple of times, which is particularly devastating to me, honestly. I don't know how I beat that line. Fog is a heck of a card versus a deck that runs out of resources so fast. Just a quick peep at the grip, and there's a Time Maiden. Time Maiden's an exceptionally powerful card. It can special summon itself and then tribute itself in order to search a Time Lord to hand, banish itself on a different turn to special a Time Lord from your deck. My opponent's going to lead with a Kaiju, and yeah, that's a pretty good way to get rid of my onboard monster. They're going to thumb through their hand 1 additional time before deciding, yeah, we probably want to go with Time Maiden. They'll special her. I say, yes, that's absolutely fine. This part of it I don't care about. Let me read Time Maiden real quick, and it does, in fact, tribute for cost, which is fantastic news because it means it's very susceptible to Called by the Grave. So, provided my opponent doesn't have Time Lords, I should be in the clear, but that's not very likely. They have Sandelion again, just magnetized to their opener. It doesn't stand up particularly well to the kaiju. That means I'm about to take 2,000 points of damage, and that's time in the round, ladies and gentlemen. Not truly, but we are 15 minutes in, and we're only, what, one game and one turn into this set. It's time to start thinking critically about if I'm able to walk away with this game, and if it would be better to go to a game 3 quicker. My opponent's going to look at the hand real quick one more time before special summoning an Exodus the Ultimate Forbidden Lord, something you may have also seen on the PPG YGO camera. This card can be special summoned by shuffling all the monsters you control, I believe, back into the deck, and there is one for my opponent. Then it is a requisite stat line to overlay into an extremely powerful machine named Gustav Max. They're not even going to bother with the Sandalian returning to the deck. Instead, they're going to dobe me for another 2,000 immediately. Or so I think. They make the very wise choice to go into a flex one of Super Dreadnought Cannon Rail Dora. Now, Dora has a really strong effect against my deck. It can detach an Xyz material to make it unaffected by card effects. Now, all of my removal is single use and spell speed 1, so it can easily be chained. It's not like I'm going to have something like a Ghost Ogre to respond to the activation. I'm going to have to burn 3 pieces of removal on this card if I want to get rid of it. One thing that separates good players from bad players, even if you're both playing bad decks, is the ability to adapt. And I love that my opponent has figured out the Super Dreadnought line is where he should be tunneling. Get it? So our hand still looks pretty good. We're going to lead with a copy of Incantation Chalice Slime, and it's so hard to decide which of these cards I'm going to get rid of. We have the incredibly impressive Vanity's Ruler, which is just doing so much for this hand, and then a bunch of ritual spells that we don't have targets for. This is a thinker. Eventually I settle on Shaddoll and send that to the graveyard in order to search an incantation from my deck. Shaddoll Ritual, of course, is an exceptionally powerful card, but is easily repeatable. You can add it back to your hand with the requisite incantations, or more importantly, you can use Incantation Inception to special either of the boards. Now that my opponent will likely have cards in the graveyard, it's time to get on Brionac lines. So the first step to getting my opponent into a position where Trishula will beat them is getting them to detach for Dora. We're going to have to do this a couple of times. Now, Brionac thankfully has an exceptionally powerful effect that allows me to not only search a Necroz from my deck to my hand, but also tuck one of my opponent's cards that's on the field back into their extra. Now, like all old cards, Brionac does have restrictions. You can only use one Brionac effect per turn, and only once that turn. That means that even though we've searched Cycle, this Brionac is going to be a sitting duck. I'm not too concerned about it, of course. We have a Valkyrus in hand, as you can see. We've just searched, and we also have a copy of Hymn of Light in the graveyard. As long as we can stave it off for 2 turns, we should be able to walk away with this one. My opponent's going to shuffle the deck, and then take their turn. I'll pass it back and they crack their knuckles. Ooh, what are they up to? You can see them thumbing through their hand. There's only 2 cards in it, but they're both particularly relevant. Truthfully, there could be a 0-card hand and I'd still have a problem outing Superior Dora. They're going to take a look at Brionac. It's a very old card. I don't expect them to have memorized the text. I certainly haven't, as any of you who've watched my previous ritual videos know. It is a spell speed 1 effect, and as a result, you probably don't have to worry about it on your turn. They're going to look at the hand once again, and oh god, I can only imagine the inner machinations of a train player. It looks like one of the 2 cards in hand is a kaiju, and it is probably not worth using a kaiju on this Brionac. Instead, my opponent's going to debate the efficacy of switching this card to attack position. Eventually, they settle on it and decide, well, okay, it is probably worth my time to get rid of this monster if nothing else. We'll do a fair amount of damage in the process, and when they go to battle phase, I'll go, okay, we do have a Valkyrus. Now, there's nothing in the graveyard that's a Necroz outside of Cycle, so unfortunately, I do have to discard Cycle, which is a big problem. Finding something like a Necroz Mirror for free is critical to my success, and my ability to find Trishula later in the game, but I don't have much of a choice. So, of course, we can activate the Brionac any time here in order to force the activation of the Superior Dora, which we have to do if we want any hope of winning. We still have a copy of Called By set, I just wish I had a target. My opponent's going to activate Superior Dora in response to my Brionac effect, and I'll say, fine, yeah, sure. The first thing we're going to lead with is a Gale Dogra. Now, Gale Dogra is an exceptionally powerful card. It allows you to spend 3,000 of your hard-earned life points to send 1 card from your extra deck to the graveyard. Now, I figure probably my way back into this game is to add this Valkyrus back. That's likely the only scenario in which I'm able to both get the Gale Dogra that now represents an immediate threat to my life points off the field, and potentially stonewall my opponent for another turn. Now, in order to do that, I'll need to be setting a Totally Awesome, which I just added to the deck. This was a $12 card. I have no idea why this completely unplayable monster is still so expensive, but who am I to talk about unplayability? Once again, I'm playing Rituals. Now, the downside to Gale Dogra is that I can only use this effect once. What makes this card so potent is that you can activate its effect twice in one turn. But, unfortunately for me, with only 3,000 life points remaining, I'm not in the business of accidentally killing myself. We're going to activate Totally Awesome's effect in order to get this Valkyrus back to hand. Now, we don't have a Necroz in the graveyard with which to use. We'll activate the effect of Chalice Slime, sending this Majesty to the graveyard, finally, in order to get an incantation from deck. We'll settle on Candle. This one adds a spell from your deck to your hand when its effect is activated, and its effect activates if it's special summoned from deck. Funny that. I love these cards that combo with themselves. We're going to look real quickly at our bevy of options, and there's not a lot left. You can see all of our very powerful, flexible one-ofs, Hymn of Light, Shinobird's Ritual, are all in the graveyard. Now, we can use this opportunity in order to get a copy of Incantation Inception to hand, which is what we'll do. Incantation Inception is an extremely powerful card. It's a generic ritual spell, but you can only tribute incantation monsters. You can also tribute an incantation monster from your field or hand in order to add this card from your graveyard back to the deck, and summon an incantation from your deck with a different name as well. It's an extremely powerful card, and unfortunately we're not going to be using that effect just yet. Instead, we're going to be using the effect of Valkyrus. Now, we have to get this Gale Dogra off our side of the board. Putting a 600 attack point monster in attack position versus a deck that routinely just puts out thousands of points of damage is not a winning move. Instead, we're going to activate the effect of Valkyrus, which allows us to tribute any number of cards from our field or hand, and then draw that many cards as long as that number is 2 or less. We've drawn, thankfully, some pretty relevant stuff. We're going to activate Pre-Preparation of Rites, and I don't know if I still have targets at this point. We used Transmigration, we used Hymn of Light, we used Shinobird Ritual. I mean, what... Yeah, I'm going to take a quick look at the graveyard, but this is a classic MBT error, forgetting that your deck is actually terrible. Those greedy ratios really coming in handy. Maybe we can discard this card for something else. In the meantime, we're going to have to use Hymn of Light to protect our Valkyrus, otherwise we will be run over, quite literally, by a train. My opponent, understanding that time is going to be called soon, wastes no time getting to the battle phase and will attack my copy of Valkyrus. We'll have to banish a copy of Hymn of Light to the graveyard in order to protect him. Unfortunately, this doesn't do a whole lot. We're still going to have to draw something that's relevant so we can out this Super Dreadnought Cannon Dora. It's really frustrating that they have no additional effects to activate, no monsters to summon. I'm really just losing to this one card. I rip an Extravagance off the top, which is pretty good, but plays very poorly with Valkyrus. I'm going to allow my opponent to banish any 6 cards they so desire from my extra deck, and look at those sleeves. Thanks so much to my friend in Japan who was able to get these for me. Wow, they're sexy. Alright, those Morphens are going to be banished face down, and while I don't show it to the camera, I can assure you there were 3 Heralds in that pile. We draw into a copy of Candle, which is something at the very least. There's maybe a scenario in which we can walk out of this. I'm going to look at the graveyard real quick. There's not a ton I want to search. As a result, I'll discard that Candle to get this copy of Incantation Inception back in my hand, and then special a different incantation from my deck. I'm thumbing through here, and I think I'm out of Talismandras. I'm on a ratio of 2-2-2-1, with the 1 being Bookstone, the least important of all of the incantations. We're going to look through the graveyard one more time. There's a couple of ways I can force this activation. Certainly, I can find a way to summon a Brionac, which is okay, but not fantastic. I think the more likely scenario is that I need to find a way to summon Clausulus. Now, Clausulus is usually used just to search a ritual spell from your deck to your hand, but he has an onboard effect too, and it's extremely potent. As a quick effect, it's able to negate the effect of a monster that was summoned from the extra deck, and reduce its attack to 0. You may notice that there is one of those on board right now. I'm going to look at this copy of Brionac in hand, and I think, you know, maybe this isn't the play. Going for a Brionac seems pretty greedy right here. The more powerful play would be a Clausulus, which is not only able to negate my opponent's Dora's effect now, but also able to prevent me from dying on their turn, provided it remains their only attacker. I'm feeling pretty good about my chances here. We're going to go ahead and activate Incantation Inception in order to special this Clausulus. Of course, Inception can only tribute incantation monsters, but thankfully, Pencil Bloom has just the right amount of stars for Clausulus to make an appearance. We're going to activate Clausulus' effect, targeting this Dora. While, of course, we could switch Valkyrus to attack position, that would require our opponent not to chain the effect of Dora, which I have a feeling they're going to. They'll think about it for a second, not particularly important, before they detach and elect to make it unaffected by card effects until the end of turn. We'll set 1 card and pass it back to our opponent. If only I could have found any way to just get Trish on board. Now, we know my opponent's on Kaiju, but at this point I don't have an understanding of the depth of the Kaiju package they play. Is it just a couple of Gamciel and Kumungus for removal spells? Are they on Interrupted Kaiju Slumber? What about the big ones? Will Jizikuri be making an appearance? 3,300 is a lot for any monster to get over, even a train. Liba? Not so much. It's possible that they're playing the max amount, and if that's the case, I maybe should be considering shotgunning this Colossalus. Instead, I'm going to hold it for as long as possible. My opponent's going to take a look at their now full grip from 2 turns of passing on Dora. Oh god, there's just so much I'm going to have to contend with. The first of which is going to be an Interrupted Kaiju Slumber. IKS is an exceptionally powerful removal spell that I think is criminally underplayed. Our opponent's going to deploy it, and oh boy, we need something. Well, thankfully, we still have a full grip. I'll go ahead and activate the Ash Blossom that's been rotting in my hand for a fair amount of time now. That prevents the special summon of the 2 monsters and the destruction effect, because of course they are the same effect. And then I believe my opponent is going to take a quick look at the hand and decide it is time to go onto an alternate line. The theory behind Dora Pass was solid, but it can only take you so far. Now, the Colossalus on field does complicate things. They're going to take a second to read it. Yes, this is a quick effect, and yes, it's going to affect your monster with no Xyz material. It means that I'm going to be able to interact with my opponent, provided they don't have any other pieces of interaction with which to remove my Coloss. They're going to thumb through the hand a couple more times. I'm a little frightened because it's very possible they have lethal, and the clock is ticking. Oh, I really have to either get out of this game or wrap it up very quickly. They're going to drum their fingers on the table, look at the hand, I believe, 1 additional time, and then decide that it is time to switch this monster to defense position. Now, this is particularly bad for me. I don't have a clean out to this monster in defense. Coloss only reduces the monster's attack. I'm going to have to find a way to get to Trishula, but I've already exhausted almost all of my resources. I believe I have a Pensaplume in hand. I'll go ahead and trigger its effect off of the Valkyris in order to draw a card, but my hand right now includes a pre-preparation of rights, just a bunch of cards with no remaining targets in the deck. I need that Chalice Slime. I need more incantations. I need a way to get to Trishula. My opponent draws for turn, and things are looking extremely bad. Now they're able to activate the effect of Interrupted Kaiju Slumber, remove my Colossalus, and OTK me. I'm starting to think maybe I should be conceding, and finally I pull the trigger. We need to get into Game 3 right now. So it's time for Game 3, and I am going first. I've decided that probably the way I win this game is by doing some sort of shenanigan that ends on that green-haired Gungus that locks my opponent from playing. I'm going to give my opponent enough cards with which to banish face down before I can Pot of Greed. Boy, what a fair card Pot of Extravagance is. This is the first time I've seen it in the opener, but again, I'm playing a 50-card deck, so I can't be that upset. The hand looks okay. It's not fantastic, but it's okay. There is something I can do blind going first, and because my opponent probably doesn't care about Greenie anyway, I might as well go on to it. We're going to discard a copy of Incantation Inception with Chalice Slime, which is about as good as it gets. You want that Incantation Inception in graveyard, so you can then activate its effect off of the incantation you summon right here. I'm going to look at the hand real quickly. This is a long road to a pre-preparation of rights on monsters that don't qualify for its benefit. We're going to thumb through, and I can't imagine we're not going to activate the effect of both Candle and Talismandra over the course of the turn. It's just a matter of what order we want to do it in. We're going to lead with the Talismandra. That's going to allow us to search a ritual monster from our deck to our hand. And I figure probably the best one we could be summoning is Lord of the Red. We're going to go ahead and fetch as best as possible, making a couple quick calculations, and I do mean quick, I am up against time here, before finally deciding that, yeah, likely we are going to want to summon the Double Trident. I'll flick him onto the board, and then take a quick look at the opener. 3 Ash, 3 games in a row. It only does so much against a deck that is so weak to it, but unfortunately for me, doesn't have an opportunity to activate its best target, Shaddoll Fusion. We'll now go into a Candle and trigger the effect of Candle. We'll get Red Eye's Transmigration, and hey, that was, you know, kind of like pre-preparation of rights. Now, if we like, we could be able to use Incantation Inception here, but we would lose our Chalice Slime in the process. I'll accidentally reveal an Ash to my opponent, but I don't think they're very concerned. We'll use as ritual fodder a copy of Amano Iwato, usually summoned off of Shinobaroness Peacock. I maybe should have boarded this out. I don't think there's really any back row in our opponent's deck, so there's no reason to activate the effect of Shinobaroness Peacock in the first place. Well, we've got a board, and we are maybe 5 minutes from time. Hopefully, this will be enough to stop our opponent in their tracks. It doesn't seem likely, but it is possible. Our opponent's hand is looking pretty choice. That set card, of course, we are telegraphing, is Called by the Grave. Let's see what they lead with. A Sandelion. 3 games in a row. 3 games in a row, Sandelion. 3 games in a row. We just lose 2,000 life points at the start of the game because of Sandelion. I'm not mad. I'm not mad. Time Lords are completely fair. They're bad, and that means they're fair. Okay. They'll attack into my copy of Lord of the Red, of course, while battle damage is negated. You know what isn't? The 2,000 points of burn and the destruction of my Lord of the Red. They're going to set a card. This is frightening to me. I haven't seen a card set all set. Maybe it's a Called by the Grave. No, I haven't seen a Called by the Grave all set either. I don't know what's in their deck. We're going to activate the effect of Incantation Chalice Slime. Having the Incantation Inception is just so powerful, I don't think I can really complain about it, even if the rest of my hand is bricks. But don't worry, I'm going to try to. We'll activate Candle's effect. Candle's okay here. We'll activate Candle and then we'll activate Talismandra, but that exhausts the pool of good ritual cards that we have. We're going to go ahead and summon the last remaining quality incantation from our list. Oh boy. So we've got the Kaleidoscope in our opener. That means we theoretically could do something like go into a Unicorn. That might be good enough. We'll activate Brionac's effect, and then we'll use Brionac in order to find a copy of really anything relevant at this point. I'm thinking about Valkyris, but I don't think I have a very clean way to summon him. Only Unicorn really makes full benefit of Necroz's Kaleidoscope. So the hand is stacked. We'll activate this copy of Necroz's Kaleidoscope, and there's so much we could send to the graveyard. I don't know if I really want to send a Herald. Herald, of course, is exceptionally powerful and could search something like a Saruya, which would be able to protect my Unicorn, or maybe a Valkyris to protect my life points from something like the follow-up Sandelion. They had 2 game 1. Who's to say they don't have 2 here as well? We could also send an Intis and hit that back row if I'm that concerned about it. It's the only unknown here, but I finally settle on a Herald, getting a copy of Valkyris to hand. Now, unfortunately for me, Unicorn doesn't really do anything to my opponent's strategy. Sure, it turns off Shekinaga, but my opponent is very happy just to use Shekinaga as material for something like a Gustav Max. We'll pass it back to my opponent, after adding this copy of Valkyris to my hand, of course, and they'll draw for turn. It looks like they've got an Exodius the Ultimate Forbidden Lord in hand, though I can't be particularly sure. All these old cards look the same. They're going to normal summon the second Sandelion. Oh, come on, not a repeat of game 1. I can't do this. Okay, now we're going to have to figure out a way to do over 4,000 points of damage. They're going to attack into our copy of Unicorn. I figure, fine, as long as we're not literally taking lethal, I probably should keep all the resources I can. And having a copy of Valkyris is potentially good since I have access to so many incantations. I could be drawing all the cards I want. They're going to set a second card. We are playing at light speed now. We're going to activate the effect of Chalice Slime to send a copy of Incantation Inception to the graveyard. We don't have very many incantations left to summon. We could get like a Bookstone or a Pensaplume. I decide on the latter and activate the effect of Pensaplume, which is going to plus me even further, but not really to anything relevant. I do potentially have an out. It's a long, convoluted way to get my opponent down to slightly fewer life points than I currently have. It's going to require a turn of setup, however, which means that I'm going to have to pass at least one more time. I'm trying to do so as quickly as possible. We'll send a Brionac from our hand to the graveyard, added back to the hand off of this Pensaplume, and just thumb through the litany of terrible, terrible Necrozes remaining in our deck. I'll end on Trishula. I figure there's probably a scenario in which I'm able to actually use Trishula's effect. We'll activate the grave effect of Incantation Inception here, and we'll special summon, what, a Bookstone? What is a Bookstone gonna give us? Well, I guess theoretically we could get the Kaleidoscope back to hand, but the only Kaleidoscope we could still perform is likely going to be a Trishula and a Clausulus, and that's a long way off. Maybe we could add this copy of Transmigration back to hand? No, seems bad. I'll take the Kaleidoscope and hope for the best. We'll activate Incantation Inception. A 6 and a 5. Oh, man. We could make Trishula here, but I don't know how strong it's going to be. We're going to send the Chalice Slime. We have to perform a Ritual Summon, or else we're going to take enough life points that we're dead to almost anything, and end on, a copy of Valk. We'll send an Ash Blossom and a Talismandra to the graveyard. We are trying desperately to figure out a scenario in which we can perform lethal next turn, and I think we might have happened upon it. The scenario in which we're able to find lethal this turn involves Shinobear and Peacock bouncing our opponent's monster, but it's unlikely that's going to happen. We're going to activate Preparation of Rites to get Shinobear and Peacock, and wait a minute, Preparation of Rites has text on it. It's not just search a ritual, there's a level cap. I'm going to add Incantation Inception back to my hand, and then count the stars on Shaddoll and Peacock. That sucker's going back into my deck, and I'm going to have to find something else. Unfortunately, though, I've taken so many actions this turn, I'm going to have to hurry. Really, there's under 2 minutes remaining on the clock. I'm going to grab a Saphira, the first target I find. Please, can this end? And we'll pass it back to my opponent. My opponent draws for turn. Oh man, anything, just anything. I need them to take an action. They're going to shuffle back this copy of Sandelian, and oh my god, I have 4,000 life points to work with. Any more damage I take is a distinct threat to my ability to dome my opponent. I'm only going to get one battle phase, and even then, I'm not likely going to be able to do 8,000. I just have to do more than I've taken. My opponent's going to look at their hand real quickly, and oh my goodness, is that a Lasleon? This card shuffles graveyards back into the deck, but more importantly, when I draw a card, it deals 1,000 life points to me. They'll normal summon it, look at the graveyard real quick, decide if it's worth shuffling back. It's very powerful, but of course, there's a couple of incantations in there, and with an Inception in my hand, I don't know if they can risk me having the second copy of Chalice Slime and popping off. They're going to pass it back, I'll take 1,000, and I do have an out. It's a hard line to parse, but all I have to get through is the singular main phase in which I play absolutely perfectly. Should be well within my control. We're going to lead with a copy of Necroz's Cycle sent to the graveyard in order to proc the effect of what I believe is a Chalice Slime. It's going to get a Pensaplume. Pensaplume's effect will trigger, and there's not really a whole lot I want to be adding back. Instead, we'll just activate the effect of Incantation Inception in order to get a Shaddoll and Peacock, which we have ripped off the top. I am feeling pretty good if we can bounce my opponent's monster. This is enough damage to present lethal. I say I'll go to battle phase as time expires, and my opponent says, in response to the summon, I'll activate Torrential. That's it. There's no Hymn of Light in the graveyard. That's the game. We've lost to Timelord dolls. What did I do? What did I do in a past life to deserve this Herculean task of wrenching this deck to playability? Ah well. Good games to my opponent. A very exciting deck. Happy to see it getting some mainstream coverage on the PPG. Check out their channel if you want to see more plays like this one.